going to present. Screen. And now I'm going to this. Hey, friends at home, you see that okay? Thank you very much. I'm going to stay right here by the microphone, so hopefully you can hear me well too. Sound good?
Yeah.
Thank you. You guys are so nice. You guys are so nice too. I really appreciate it. How do you feel about me doing this? Do you like that okay? Is that good? Is it going to make you go blind over time? Nathan, you going to be all right? Might make it a little bit easier for you to see, and you guys at home are going to just see it. Who can tell me what the 4 rebirths of the Italian Renaissance were? They all start with rebirth. And I like the order that they go in. Okay. Good.
Greek and Roman art form.
Yeah. Perfect. Those 4 rebirths, right, start in the Italian peninsula and then spread to other places. They spread north, basically. They have to go out of the Italian peninsula, go north. For the most part, really just north. Maybe a little bit to the west, northwest, a little bit to the northeast, but really just north all the way up to southern England. And so what we have in the Northern Renaissance, how it differs from the Italian Renaissance, it does differ quite a bit. First of all, yes, there is a rebirth of towns and trade, just like on the Italian peninsula. But then also there is a rebirth of classical, and you might remember if you saw the lecture, what does classical mean? Yeah.
Greek and Roman.
Greek and Roman, perfect. Greek and Roman texts, but these are Greek and Roman Christian texts. They're by Christian people, so they're a little bit later. They're early church fathers, for example, like Saul of Tarsus, who becomes Paul, one of the early church fathers. So it's a rebirth of those classical Christian texts. It's also a rebirth of natural art forms. We didn't really get a chance to talk about how art changes last time. We're going to very soon, probably on Monday, look at art. Just look at statues, look at paintings from the Renaissance. And you'll see a real difference between the Italian Renaissance and what they're choosing to paint, what they're choosing to sculpt, and what the folks up north are choosing to sculpt and choosing to paint. Also, it's the rebirth of individual moral man. I think, and I hope that I argued about the Italian Renaissance, that really it was kind of a selfish sort of Renaissance. People were interested in showing off their talents. People were interested in getting rich, being famous, enjoying their wealth for themselves. The Northern Renaissance has some elements of that, but then also it seems like in the North, they're really concerned with being not the most famous, talented person, but in some ways the most moral person, or the person who's closest to God. Not in a medieval way. You'll see there's a bit of a difference there. But those are your 4 rebirths of the Northern Renaissance. Yeah, at any point in time, if you have a question, just give me a way to yell it out. So once again, with towns and trade, this is how it is. This is where it's happening. It's happening in the new towns, and the new towns are getting wealthy through trade. The new towns are centers where merchants and traders and artisans are kind of residing and traveling to. There's also a number of scholars or students and professors. And so there's this sort of international kind of element to the town and trade at that point in time. And you can imagine that if a trader moves from northern Italy, takes whatever wares or goods that they have, goes up to the southern parts of what becomes Germany, or goes to southern England, and says, "Hey, you won't believe what they're doing down there in my hometown, in Florence." And I'll say, "Well, what are they doing?" They've got this whole new concept of stuff. We're trying to figure out how to be a citizen. We're trying to figure out how to be famous. We're trying to figure out how we're enjoying our wealth or how we can enjoy our wealth. So that happens with students. Students from all over Europe go down and study in Italian universities. They get the Renaissance vibe when they're down there. They go back up to the north and it just changes a little bit. Really what you find then throughout all of Europe is in towns where you've got those bourgeois people, those middle class people who have wealth and who have education, all of those people are starting to feel this, not all of them, some of those people are starting to feel this renaissance one way or another. Should we make out just a percentage of the population that's actually feeling this, that's actually doing this, that actually knows about the Renaissance? Do you want to venture a wild guess as to, in, let's say, 1500, what percentage of the population is kind of throwing off the medieval concept of, I'm so afraid of sinning, I'm going to go to hell and all that kind of stuff, and starting to live like this? What would you say the percentage is of people? 5%. I like that, 5%. Another guess? Higher or lower? It's going to be like a game show. Who says more than 5%? 10%. Do I hear 10%? 2%. Do I hear nothing? 1%. Less than 1%. It's a very small number. Not only do you have to live in a town, but you have to be the elite of a town. And so we're really talking about certainly less than 5% of the whole population who know that a Renaissance is happening. Everybody else is doing what they've always done. The classical texts, like I said, that they're looking at aren't things like histories of Rome or, what happened in the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens and things like that. The classical texts that they're looking at are the works of the early church fathers. Many of them in Greek, some of them in Latin. They also, though, then start to, once they figure out what the early Christians said, kind of went back a few decades or a couple of centuries before that and said, well, what did the pagans, what did the non-Christians say about ethics and morality? They start to dabble in that a little bit as well. And once again, they're really kind of shocked to find that people who aren't Christian can tell the difference or can have an idea of what is good and what is evil. It doesn't necessarily have to be based on 10 commandments and, sin and salvation and those sorts of things. So they're trying to figure out, once again, not how to be the best courtier, or they're not trying to figure out how to be the best prince or ruler in a city-state. They're trying to figure out how to be the most ethical and moral person and how to improve society and how to improve life for people. In fact, what they're trying to do is how to lead a morally good and Christian life in a more educated and thoughtful way, I think, than the usual of just, being afraid of eternal damnation because you did something wrong. It's not just about fear, it's about improving things. I'm somewhat glad that you can't really tell what's going on in that triptych or that three-framed painting. Maybe your eyesight is actually quite good. You can tell what's going on. I don't know. Can you tell anything? These are in the middle. These are earthly delights. And, well, I can kind of see that there's some naughty stuff going on there. In the middle, we have people enjoying earthly delights. They're essentially having fun and sinning. And over to the right, I don't know if you can tell that people are being punished. I don't think we look at this actually when we have our art today, but this is more of a medieval kind of view of things. If you, here in the middle, have a really good time and sin, you're going to end up on the right, being punished in hell. So they're trying to get beyond this and maybe be more moral and be more proactive about having a nice relationship with God. In fact, Northern art, once again sad, I didn't tell you about Italian Renaissance art yet, but we'll deal with both. But Northern art is really more concerned with religion. It is concerned with sin. And then it goes beyond that, and it becomes really quite concerned with common people, just regular people, like peasants. And from this period of time, you're probably, if you were alive during this period of time, at first you would say, why in the world would anyone paint a peasant? I mean, I get why you would paint a saint, or why you paint an angel, or God, or Jesus, and so on. And then I can even understand in the Italian Renaissance why you might paint a famous person, a rich person, a powerful person. But why in the world would anyone care to paint just a regular old peasant? Common people, common places, a forest, for example, things like, rocks and trees and a river and that sort of stuff. This is all new. Nobody was painting that stuff in the Middle Ages because, well, it's not God, it's not a saint. And so now it comes back. And the reason that it comes back in the north, not so much the south, but the reason it comes back in the north is because in the north, they feel like God's stamp or God's footprint is evident in all things. And when we actually do the lecture on art, I will show you a sketch, an amazing sketch of a rabbit. You will be impressed, but you might ask yourself, why anyone would want to sketch a rabbit in the first place? Because there's nobility in all things. It's a very Christian idea, proper Christian. That individual moral man, once again, in the Italian Renaissance, it's all about showing off your talents, showing your wealth, the whole Kardashianism thing, where you're trying to be the best courtier or ruler and that sort of stuff. In the North, it's really more about the power of individuals. This is different, once again, from the medieval period. The power of an individual to find a personal relationship with God. In the medieval period, God is just there, and everybody does everything to please God, and is kind of afraid of God and afraid of eternal punishment and so on. Now people feel educated enough, maybe talented enough in kind of a weird way, to figure out for themselves, maybe by reading a holy text, by reading the Bible, they can uncover the secrets of how to be a morally good person and actually push a priest out of the way, push the church out of the way, and just have a more direct and individual relationship with God. These beliefs about God and a believer and pushing the church out of the way are a kind of pre-Reformation that's going on. In our next unit, we'll talk about the Reformation, when the corrupt Catholic Church, a lot of people leave the corrupt Catholic Church because of all the corruption, and they start new forms of Christianity, Protestant forms of Christianity. And so this is sort of the beginning of that. If you're going to push out the church and push out the Pope, this is it, pre-Reformation. People who are studying humanism, people who are studying history and poetry and language and rhetoric and all those sorts of things that we talked about last time, they're important to the Northern Renaissance too. They are thinkers. They are readers of classical texts, and then they come up with their own ideas, and they publish their own ideas. We'll talk about a couple of them here in just a second. How's the pace? Is it going okay? Any questions? You can stop, pause, or tell a joke? No? Good. One of the Northern Renaissance humanists is a guy, once again, so cool that he just usually goes by one name, Erasmus. And Erasmus is a clergyman. He's a priest, but he's got some kind of, they're not heretical ideas, but they're sort of newfangled Northern Renaissance ideas that could get him in trouble. Not other people in trouble at different periods of time. But what Erasmus is all about is education. He wants people to become educated so that, in his mind, the more educated you are, the more moral you are. And I think that's kind of easy to understand from this period of time. If, think about this. Imagine it's 500 years ago. Who do you think is committing the property? Who's stealing? Who's committing property crimes?
Okay.
Certainly the king, but don't tell anybody. He's stealing like in a big way. What's the common crime? Steal a loaf of bread. Yeah, it's yes, thank you very much. That's exactly right. It's poor people, and poor people aren't educated. And so there's this belief at this period of time that the more educated you are, but let's be honest, that's actually the more wealthy you are and so on, the less likely you are to commit crime and quite frankly to sin. So education as a way to achieve moral and intellectual improvement. Now Erasmus is funny. He's known for being funny, and sometimes I think being funny is nice because if you say things in a sarcastic way rather than a critical way, sometimes you don't get in as much trouble, and that's exactly what Erasmus is doing. Erasmus pokes fun at the problems with the church. He pokes fun at problems with society. His end goal is that people will change, that society will change, or the church will change. But it's funny rather than critical. I learned from Erasmus to do that. So sometimes if I want to say something in a staff meeting at school, and I'm actually really bugged about it, and I could just stand up and be all grumpy about it. But if I make a joke about it, then sometimes you get what you want, and people aren't quite so offended. Here's an example of that with Erasmus. He writes a book called In Praise of Folly. He writes this in Latin. Everybody's pretty much writing in Latin, really up to this point in time. They're starting to write in other languages. But he writes this book called In Praise of Folly. And he's praising folly or foolishness. And he's really talking about all of these things in society that are foolish and just really criticizing everything, but in a funny way. So by poking fun at it, he pokes fun, for example, at marriage, and says, how crazy is it that people get together and say that they can stay together for their whole lives? You really have to be kind of foolish to engage in something called marriage. Or how foolish could you possibly be? How crazy foolish would you have to be in order to have kids? At this point in time, it's not unlikely that a woman who's trying to give birth dies in childbirth. And so he says, you really have to be foolish in order to do that. Or war, the causes of wars and keep wars going, all this kind of stuff is really quite foolish. You need foolishness for people to go to war and stay at war. And even being happy is foolish. He jokes. He says that there's no reason to be happy with all of the terrible things going on. Once again, he's kind of poking fun, and people kind of laugh along with it. Yeah, this is really true. The whole jokes about marriage and stuff like that. He's also poking fun at superstition, what you and I would call superstition, but what people believed in back then, actually. Miracles being performed and things like that, which is kind of hard to believe because a lot of people still believe in miracles at this point in time. And he's a clergyman, so he should believe in miracles. He pokes fun at scientists who are trying to figure out how the world works. You and I generally respect scientists. He's making fun of them. He's making fun of these pieces of paper that the church starts to sell called indulgences. These pieces of paper take away your sin. So if you sin, you can buy your way out of that. And we start to argue no matter what you've done, you can buy your way out of it. It later on becomes He's already poking fun at that. He's poking fun at people who are who study religion, like himself. He's poking fun at kings. That now he's getting dangerous, right? You don't want to poke too much fun at a king. He pokes fun at courtiers. Remember, we had the Book of the Courtier in Renaissance Italy, and so Baldassare Castiglione would say, "Hey, the end all be all to life is to be a good courtier." And he's basically saying, "No, being ambitious and that sort of stuff." And he's even poking fun at people like himself, clergymen. But I think one of the funniest stories that he writes and doesn't sign his name to is this story called Julius Excluded from Heaven. Julius is Pope, and Julius dies around this period of time, shortly before this. Erasmus writes a story about Julius, and Julius was known as the warrior Pope. So Julius spends most of his papacy riding from one city-state to another, conquering these city-states with his army. And he increases the size of the papal states and is getting richer and that sort of thing. But what's the Pope supposed to do you think? Or who's the Pope actually on the earth for, because that other person can't be on the earth right now? God or Jesus, right? And Jesus basically says, love your neighbors and turn the other cheek. So here's the warrior Pope, and he dies. He goes to heaven. Here's where the story starts. And he goes to the pearly gates, and St. Peter is there, and the Pope shows up, Julius II shows up and says, "Oh, Peter, it's me, Julius II. I'm here to get into heaven." And St. Peter says, "You can't come in." And Julius gets really mad. What do you mean I can't get in? I'm the Pope. I'm Jesus' representative, from the earth. And Peter basically says, "No, you're actually a terrible person. You led all these people into their deaths. You created strife and conflict, and you have no business in heaven. You have to go to the other place." And Julius is livid. It kills back in the day. It's a hilarious story back in the day because people assumed that no matter what kind of a nasty individual the Pope was, believe me, around this period of time, they're incredibly nasty. That person would automatically get into heaven because they're the Pope. And so Erasmus is poking fun at that, and people really enjoy that. He doesn't pin his name to it, though, because if he writes Erasmus on the story, what do you think might happen to him? Yeah,
he's going to get excommunicated.
Yeah, and the other X, right? Excommunicated is horrible. You burn in hell forever. But now they have to send you to hell with a good old-fashioned execution as well. So doesn't sign his name. Everyone's like, "Hey, Erasmus, this is hilarious. Did you write that?" He's like, "No, I don't want to talk about it." He's got a friend named Thomas More, another Northern Renaissance humanist, another guy who is interested in improving society and sort of criticizing what people have going on. He too is criticizing indirectly. His job is not just to be an educated person or a humanist. His job is also to be a counselor to the English king, Henry VIII. In fact, he's more or less in charge of the English kingdom for a period of time for Henry VIII. So he has this idea which runs counter to what 99.9% of people believe. He looks at the world and he sees the world as evil and it's filled with sin. But most people think that the world is evil and filled with sin because human beings, man, just is sinful. And that's why Jesus had to come to earth and be sacrificed so that sins could be forgiven. What Thomas More believes is that the evils of this world were due to, you can gasp if you want to, because he's going to sound like a communist in a second, but he thinks the evils of the world are due to private property. Thank you for the guess. Thanks for the guess. And ignorance. So once again, the lack of education. If everybody was educated, everybody would be moral. By the way, do you believe that? Do you think that the more educated you are, the more moral you are? Like Danielle said, the king, oftentimes the king is committing the biggest crimes, but not getting in trouble. What do you think? Moral people, the more education, the more moral you are. Yeah.
I think the more educated you are, the more aware you are.
Nice. Yeah. So you know you're doing evil, right? When you're like a Bond supervillain, doctor, whatever. And yeah, big crime. Good. He writes a book called Utopia. Oh, that's kind of a word that we know. Utopian. What's utopian mean?
Something like perfect society.
Perfect, yeah. And it's always, it's never really completely perfect, is it? It's always kind of, not perfect. He writes this book called Utopia. It actually is Greek and it means nowhere. So nowhere is perfect, really. But this Utopia that he writes is a book about a society, and this is written in 1516. So more or less, English seafarers or explorers have just gone across the Atlantic and discovered there's something there. North America is there. And so he places Utopia off the coast of North America and says, Utopia is this perfect place. First, there's a whole bunch of ideas in Utopia. He's describing a perfect society in the new world, an ideal community. And by describing this, almost like a travel book, like he showed up to Utopia and saw what the people of Utopia were doing in terms of, trade and slavery and warfare and toleration and just all these different things. He's describing this ideal community. By doing that, he is once again doing what his friend Erasmus was doing, criticizing, not by being funny, but by promoting a different place. Does that make sense? In this other place, they do this. And what he's really saying is, gosh, isn't it terrible that we torture people to death here? Or gosh, isn't it terrible that here people are so greedy for gold and silver? In Utopia, people don't value gold and silver. So he's criticizing social hierarchy. There are better people and lesser people throughout European history. And he's criticizing that. He's criticizing this desire for wealth and money. In fact, he's kind of criticizing, if you think about it, what's going on in Italy with their Renaissance. He criticizes religious intolerance, says that the utopians are open to different systems of belief. He doesn't like, apparently, the criminal justice system that's going on in England or in Europe at this point in time, with a lot of torturing people and executing people for small infractions of the law. And he doesn't like war very much. He's critiquing all those things. The utopians try to buy people off instead of going to war with them. He talks about how the utopians have their chamber pots or their toilets are made out of precious metals. They poop and pee into gold to show how little they value gold. And of course, everybody else, especially around the period of time in Europe, is crazy for gold and silver. So he's describing all of this stuff, but I've got to tell you, More isn't utopian himself. He's not perfect. He lives in society. So as Chancellor of England, he has people who don't believe in the Catholic Church burned to death. He has people punished in gruesome ways because they've committed crimes. So the very things that he has to do as Chancellor of England, he's critiquing in his own book. By the way, I'll go back to this really quickly. Kind of a sad thing that happens with Thomas More. Here's a nice portrait of Thomas More. I like this thing that he has around his neck. It's kind of like his Chancellor bling. It shows that he's in charge of stuff. It looks like a bunch of dollar signs, but it's not. And then over here on the left of the screen is what happens to Thomas More. The King of England decides that he wants a divorce and he wants a new religion. He gives up Catholicism and marries this woman. And he wants all the rich and influential people throughout England to say that all of this is okay. Thomas More, who's his friend, doesn't think it's okay, and so he keeps his mouth shut. Finally, the king says, "No, you can't keep your mouth shut. You have to say how you feel about my new marriage and the new religion that we have going on." And Thomas More basically says, "Well, okay, I don't like any of it. It's wrong." And Henry VIII gets really angry and has his head chopped off. This is what's happening right here. So credit Thomas More for, wanting to improve things, okay, living in the here and now. But then when it comes to the end of things, he has to stand by his convictions. He loses his head. At this point in time, we see the beginnings of science and the spread of universities. I probably should have done that the other way around. We see the spread of universities throughout Europe and more people interested in how the world works. There's this thing called the Holy Roman Empire. I'll talk about that a lot. It exists all the way up until about 1806. And there's another somewhat funny guy who says, it's not holy, it's not Roman, and it's not an empire. What it is Germany before Germany existed, and just a little bit larger than Germany. So I like to call it pre-Germany on steroids. That's the Holy Roman Empire. Don't be confused by any of those words. And so in Germany, at this point in time, you have 13 new universities being established by various rulers who want their people to, the elite, to become educated so that they can become more moral, yeah, and good. And maybe lead society into a better direction. In addition to just in general becoming more educated, they're also trying to figure out how the world works. And they're interested in the power of individuals. This is kind of a Renaissance thing too. An individual who thinks they can for themselves figure out how something works. And so you might be looking at the stars and planets and figuring out how planets move and that sort of thing. And this is really what we start to see. And I think this is part of this Northern Renaissance as well. Curiosity about God's creation and trying to figure out the laws and rules governing God's creation. So science. I will show you, like I said, probably on Monday. It won't be, but on Monday I will show you some art, and you will see the difference between Italian Renaissance art and Northern Renaissance art. So people like Hans Holbein, he's the one who paints this portrait of Henry VIII here to the top right, or Albrecht Dürer. This is this guy right here. Albrecht Dürer is he paints himself 26 times, paints or sketches himself 26 times over the course of his life, from a very young man to when he's a pretty old guy. He's sort of the inventor of the selfie in a way, and he's very self-confident and likes to be himself. You get a lot of religious works. Here's Adam and Eve over here on the left. You also get, like I said, some nature and some peasants. This is a kind of a peasant party going on right here. And then, I already gave you the rabbit or the hare here on the right. We'll see a better picture of that next week. And that's an Albrecht Dürer as well. It looks really nice. In Italy, there are, as part of kind of mania for Greco-Roman stuff, they also have quite a bit of mythological scenes. And the Northern Europeans don't seem to be quite so enamored with mythological subjects. But like I said, regular people doing regular things. I think that different conditions in or on the Italian peninsula, and then going north in places like the Holy Roman Empire and England and bits of France. The different conditions of the people living in those places create a kind of different Renaissance. And I think it's kind of ironic that the popes at this point in time are Renaissance guys, more interested in living in the here and now, enjoying their wealth and power than they are in saving souls. And the farther away you get from the Pope, the more people are concerned with religion. People in Rome are pretty corrupt and don't care too much about, Christianity. Get a few hundred miles away, people really are concerned with Christianity. Instead of being so self-centered and selfish like they are in Italy or the Italian Peninsula, they're more religious, they're more ethical, and it's kind of pre-Reformation. And once again, they're also more interested in the way that the world works. They're interested in figuring out what's happening scientifically.